You know, we hear a lot about global food security, and it always sounds like this massive, super complicated problem. But what if one of the best solutions is actually kind of simple? Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating study from 2024 that looks at that exact idea in Bangladesh. To really get why this is so important, let's just start with this one number: 21%. That's how many people in Bangladesh are dealing with chronic food insecurity. And that's not just a statistic, That's millions of families, millions of people worrying about where their next meal is coming from. So, what does this crisis actually look like for people? Well, in rural Bangladesh, farming is everything. About half the population relies on it for their jobs. So you can imagine when farmers are having a tough time, it's not just them. It puts entire communities right on the edge. But right in the middle of this huge challenge, there's this really powerful idea that's starting to grow. What if the answer isn't some new fancy technology, but something much older, much wiser? What if the solution has been right there in the soil the whole time? The idea is called crop diversification. And honestly, it's pretty simple. It's basically the farmer's version of not putting all your eggs in one basket. So instead of growing just one thing, like rice, all year long, farmers plant a whole bunch of different crops. So just look at the two paths a farmer could take. Over on the left, you've got monocropping. That's planting just one thing. It is super high risk. I mean, one bad drought or one type of pest could just totally wipe out your income for the entire year. Plus, it just sucks the same nutrients out of the soil year after year. But on the right, you've got diversification. It's a whole system that builds strength. More crops mean you've got multiple ways to make money. You've got better food for your family, and the soil is just healthier. And the good news just keeps on coming. Research shows that diversification doesn't just lower risk, it can actually boost a farmer's income, create more work, help pull people out of poverty, and naturally keep pests in check. And on top of all that, it gives their family a much healthier, more varied diet. It's a win-win-win. Okay, so the idea sounds great on paper, right? But does it actually work out in the real world? Well, that brings us to the heart of this explainer, the Bangladesh field test. A team of researchers decided to find out for sure. So they went to northern Bangladesh, an area where food insecurity is a really big problem, and they sat down and interviewed 609 farming families. They wanted to see, with their own eyes, what kind of impact crop diversification was actually having on people's day-to-day lives. So to get a real answer, they had to measure a few very specific things. And their method was actually pretty brilliant in its simplicity. First, they figured out exactly how diversified each farm was. Second, they measured each family's food security level, using a standard global scale to get a really clear picture of their situation. And then, the most important part, they looked for the connection between those two things. All right, so what did they find? What did all this data actually show? Well, as it turns out, the connection is pretty much impossible to ignore. First, let's just get a lay of the land. Take a look at the farms they studied. A huge chunk of them, 64%, were already highly diversified. Another third were doing it moderately. And only this tiny little sliver, just 3%, were really specialized in one or two crops. So this tells us a lot of farmers are already onto this strategy. Okay, now this is the slide that tells the whole story. Look at that bar on the left. For the farms that were the least diversified, more than 8% of those families were severely food insecure. Now look at the bar on the right, the highly diversified farms. That number, it's 0. Not one single family. Let that sink in. The difference is just absolutely staggering. The conclusion couldn't be clearer, and hey, you don't have to take my word for it. The researchers themselves said it perfectly. Households with more diverse crops were simply more food secure than those without. The data really does speak for itself. So knowing this is one thing, and it's huge, but it brings up the really big question, right? How do we make this happen for more farmers? What's the actual path to security? And the study didn't just stop there. It also looked into what factors make it easier for farmers to actually make this switch and be successful at it. And the data pointed to a few key things that kept popping up. Getting access to farming training, that was critical. Other things that mattered were farm income, just how big the farm was, and how many years of experience the farmer had. Even having more family members who could help out made a positive difference. Basically, it comes down to this. Having the right resources, knowledge, and experience is what empowers farmers to make this change. And all of this leads to a very clear, actionable takeaway. The study's authors recommend that governments and other organizations need to step up. They should be making it easier to get training and providing financial support to help farmers choose diversity instead of being dependent on a single crop. So we're left with this powerful idea. We've got a real, proven tool that can help fight food insecurity in Bangladesh. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? If embracing diversity can make one farm so much stronger, could this simple, powerful idea be the key to securing the food future for all of us, all around the globe?